Jay Shear.
Jay Shear.
Jay Shear.
Jay Shear,
business consultant.
Jay Shear.
Jay Shear Business Consulting.
Welcome. I'm Jay Shear with Jay Shear Business Consulting. We build solid foundations for service-based businesses to grow and scale and achieve the results and success they deserve. And you've joined Business Minds Coffee Chat. Lou Holtz said, "Show me someone who has done something worthwhile, and I'll show you someone who has overcome adversity." On today's episode, we're going to talk about overcoming adversity and making a difference in the world, mental health, social anxiety, how to manage it, the journey to greater confidence, and more. Our guest is an entrepreneur who, at the age of 12, started a YouTube channel about video games, which grew to 35,000 subscribers. At age 15, he began creating websites and apps and started one of the top Minecraft servers in the world, netting him hundreds of thousands of dollars. Today, he's a Forbes and TEDx featured speaker, host of a global top 100 podcast, best-selling author, and coach who helps shy, stressed, and anxious people be themselves confidently in front of anyone. His work has been featured in popular media outlets such as Forbes, Mind Valley, Influencive, Huffington Post, and Inc. magazine. Please welcome Mark Metry. Mark, thank you so much for being here. It is great to see you.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be here. Thank you for creating this platform.
Absolutely. Well, I am super excited to jump into this conversation. Just researching you and studying some of your work and watching your videos and reading some of your writings has been not only inspiring for me, but it's really opened my eyes and has helped me out immensely in a number of ways. So let's dig right into the conversation. I would love it if you would take us back a bit and share with us really where your story begins. And Mark, what were some of the early experiences that you can recall that shaped the work that you do today?
Yeah, definitely. I'm a son of immigrants. My parents came to this country from Egypt a couple of years before I was born, and lived like the immigrant lifestyle. My parents were always working, moved around to like many different apartment buildings, from like the projects to the hood to eventually moving to like this small town out of the inner city. And for me, when I was like 8, 9 years old, I was sort of placed in this environment where, let's just say, nobody looked like me. And also at this time in America, this was like post 9/11. And so any kind of like Middle Eastern or like Arab discrimination was happening at that time. And so I remember being a kid and kind of like facing the butt of that. And unknowingly at the time, that sort of just placed me into like a sort of like a bubble, and it kind of like trapped me in my own mind. And I went from some kid who was just like trying to live his life to like all of a sudden, not being able to be myself, not really having any friends, not playing any sports, not really being able to live my life. Because at the time I had no idea, but I had social anxiety. And so for me, as a result, like kind of like you said, I still had this need to communicate. And so I ventured into the internet and started a YouTube channel, started different websites. And for me, what was really interesting was, when I was like making 6 figures, doing something that I enjoyed, it was very confusing because I sort of felt like I did everything that society sort of places as a definition of success. And yet, I was like still unable to be myself. I was still depressed. And so for me, when I was about 18 years old, I go off to college. And I realized I have social anxiety, and I try to like challenge myself out of it. I try to talk to people, and really what happened was that I failed. And if anything, things got worse. And I would try to talk to people, and every time I would try to do that, it just would feel like my brain or my mind would just like literally hold me back. And so as a result, I was filled with a lot of pain. I was very confused. I was like, man, I guess this is just my life forever. And so next thing I knew, I became like seriously depressed for the first time in my life. My lifelong social anxiety transformed into like social isolation. I started to use like food, alcohol to deal with my emotions. The next thing I knew, I was like obese. And then I had sleeping problems. And then I was suicidal for about a period of like a month, like trying to take my own life. And that to me is kind of like what I look back at as like the climax of my life. And after that, it was like a slow, gradual kind of like week by week, month by month, getting out of that, to be able to sort of start to manage and deal and start to like rewire my brain, like in about 2016. And then the next year after that, I started a podcast, and then that just, kind of got the ball rolling, and it got me to do everything that I'm doing now. So.
Well, I thank you for going back and sharing some of that story, because it becomes very important as we look at what you're doing today and what you've learned about yourself and about social anxiety, about stress, and ways and tools that you can use to help you continue to push forward. I'm curious, when you were young and you were going through these feelings that you had and these difficult challenges that you were facing, what advice or what type of conversations did you have with your parents at that point?
Well, it's interesting because basically like what happens with social anxiety is that it like kind of traps you in a bubble, and it's a bubble. It's not just based on like your feeling. It's not just based on your thoughts. It's actually like this algorithm that's like a cycle between your nervous system, so people will get shy, but if you have social anxiety, like you will feel your heartbeat, your mind will go blank, and it'll kind of like remove you from your sense of free will. And so in terms of the conversations that I was having, I didn't really have any conversations. And a big part of social anxiety is that it not only, makes you feel shy or makes you feel alone when it comes to like maybe different people that don't know you, but also people that are very close to you. So like, I never talked to my parents about this. I think there was one time where my parents were like, something's wrong. And then they ended up like going to the school to like try to report it. And nothing really happened. So other than that, like that's all I remember in terms of the conversations. Like I didn't really have conversations, or, part of like what social anxiety is, like it's this disease in your brain that makes you not be yourself in front of other people, and so oftentimes it may start within a certain group of people or an environment, but then it leaks over to every single area of your life, even your family, which is quite sad. And also I think that's why like there's a lot of people out there who, end up committing suicide. And like, that's exactly what almost happened to me. And I think there's a huge correlation between social anxiety and suicide. And like, even if someone loves you, not being able to have that conversation because your brain is like actively sending messages to your mind and your nervous system that prevents you from doing that. So it's very lonely. It's very terrible.
Wow. And so true. You spend a significant amount of time today, obviously providing others the tools and strategies to work through this, to help them, to provide them the help that maybe they didn't know who to ask or where to go to receive help like that. As you have learned so much over the years and based on what you're doing today, looking back, would you suggest to yourself at an earlier age to try to have conversations with your parents, to ask for help, to open that door?
I mean, yeah, for sure. But I think like I think for me, like one of the big misconceptions about social anxiety is that, and obviously it's like, there's many different forms and not everyone is the same, but one of the biggest misconceptions is that social anxiety means like you're antisocial. That's actually not the case at all. Like if anything, it's the opposite. People with social anxiety, they actually want to be very social, but like they literally just can't. And it's like this is what makes it a mental health problem. And so for me, if I could give myself advice back then, I mean, it wouldn't really be any advice because I'm glad everything happened the way that it did for me to end up here. But I think I definitely would have given advice to my parents. For sure. Because when you're a kid, you have no idea what's happening. I would have definitely given advice to my parents for sure.
And what would you say? What kind of advice would you give?
Yeah, I mean, I would tell them, like, for me when I was younger, I mean, not like anything, my parents didn't like abuse me or anything like that, thank God. But I always like remember, like, whether it was my mom or my dad, when we were in social situations, they would always tell me, like, oh, don't be shy, or like, oh, be confident, or like, oh, speak up. And like the issue with that is that people with social anxiety, literally like every single second, they tell themselves that, like, literally every single second, they're trying to be social. And like I tell people that I literally spent every single day of my life trying to not be socially anxious. I literally spent every day of my life trying to be myself, trying to be confident, trying not be shy. But it doesn't matter, because a lot of the times people who are like facing this, their go-to response is to like use their thoughts and to use their sort of emotions and their feelings. But a lot of the times, like the issue, the anxiety is not in your mind, it's in your brain. And so trying to use just your mind to fix a brain health issue is quite frankly almost impossible unless you're going to force yourself to do actions. And so for me, I would have like gone back and given advice to my parents and say, hey, learn a little bit more about mental health and realize that like it's not a choice that someone has to be shy or not shy, or to be socially anxious or not anxious. And like that's what makes this like I said, like a mental health problem, so like I think that understanding would have been the most important thing that I would have told them.
Interesting. What helped you move past the point where you were thinking about taking your own life? What was it that helped you get through that to at least take a step forward and welcome another day?
Yeah. And I mean, it's honestly so sad, because I honestly talk to people every day who are like, my uncle or my friend just committed suicide. And it's crazy, and 850,000 people every year commit suicide. And on my podcast, I did this episode called Listen to This if you're thinking of killing yourself, committing suicide. And it's literally my most downloaded episode by far. And so I'm trying to find more and more ways to talk about this. So I appreciate the question. So for me, one of the ways that I was trying to commit suicide was, I was living in Boston at the time, and Boston's a very great city. And I remember the exact spot where I was living on my college campus. It was the border, like the town over, let's just say, was pretty dangerous. Wasn't a nice place. And I remember like getting, campus police alerts on my phone, like every other day that would say like, oh, don't walk down this street. There's been like a mugging. There's been a shooting. There was like a lot of gang activity, I remember. And so for me, when I was suicidal, the best way to describe it is I just sort of felt like my brain broke. And one of the biggest catalysts was that I just couldn't go to sleep at night. And so I would like try to close my eyes, and then my mind would just go and go and go and go and go and go and go, go, go. And then next thing I knew, I would like open my eyes, look at my phone, and it's like 5:30 in the morning. And my brain's just been overthinking for like 8 hours, which is like literally torture. Like it destroys you. And so for me, what I did was like, you know what? I'm in so much pain. I don't know how to get out of this issue. And so let me just start going for walks in like these very dangerous neighborhoods at like 1 a.m. and just like pray to God that someone just walks up to me and kills me, because I don't want to experience my life anymore. And so I did that for about a period of like 3-4 weeks. And I remember on one of the nights where I was kind of walking and hoping for this to happen, I was sort of walking, looking down, and I remember being in the middle of like an interstate highway bridge, so like normally during the daytime, like this interstate highway has like 4 different lanes on each side. There's like all kinds of cars zooming, very loud. But I remember walking, and I remember feeling like this sense of silence. So much silence. It was almost as if like someone had a remote control and someone hit the mute button, like on a TV. And I remember when I kind of felt that kind of sense of silence, I remember looking up and kind of like looking around. And I remember just like hearing nothing at all. And I remember one of the things that really shifted me was like right before that moment, my brain was like, thinking all kinds of thoughts, right? And I remember when I experienced that moment of silence, it was almost as if like I could hear like my true voice. It's not like I was hearing voices or anything like that, thank God. But what it basically showed me was that I don't remember what the exact thought was, but I remember one of my thoughts was surrounded of like, oh, you don't deserve to be alive. You're like a force of, negativity for the world. You have like no value to add to people. And I remember when there was that silence, all of a sudden, it kind of gave me a moment of clarity where I was just sort of like, wait, where did those previous thoughts even come from? Like, who was even thinking that? And I remember just sort of having this moment to myself and just being really introspective and being like, wait, what is my brain like even telling me? And I remember sort of thinking back and then realizing like, oh, wait, the last time that I heard those things were the times where like I was facing like bullying and discrimination from when I was a kid. And so all of a sudden I was just like, wait. So my brain is like this machine that's like just repeating what I heard as a kid that I don't even think myself. And so all of a sudden, like when I realized that, it was almost as if sort of like someone just like snapped me out of like my trance. Because a lot of the times, like when you're doing this, it's very logical. Like you don't think to your head like, oh, I'm going to go kill myself now. It's very, very logical. You don't even notice it. It's sort of like your brain is like pulling you down this like tunnel, like this hole. And like you realize it before it's too late kind of a thing. And so when I had that moment of silence, that moment of clarity, that moment where I sort of questioned my own thoughts, that almost kind of like snapped me out of like my trance almost. And I remember just like running home as fast as I could. And I remember running and like going to my college dorm room and like going to the bathroom and sort of like standing and looking at myself in the mirror. And I remember when I was looking at myself in the mirror, just kind of making direct eye contact. It was just very weird. It was very different. And I remember like all of a sudden kind of like taking my fingers and like kind of like putting them around like my waistline because I was like, man, my pants are like really tight. And I was wearing jeans at the time. And I was like, I don't remember buying like skinny jeans. And then all of a sudden, like it clicked in my head of like, wow, Mark, like the last 2 months, you gained like 85 pounds. You're like depressed, you're suicidal. And so I didn't exactly realize it at all in that moment, but it was just my slow progression of me starting to realize like, oh, like this is the situation you're in. And there's this quote that says, you can't see the picture when you're the one in the frame. And so for me, like when that happened, it was like a huge, like very just like gradual, sort of just like what's even happening here? And like me questioning everything, me like, what is going on? What's happening with my mind? But even at that time, like I had no idea what mental health was at all. I had no idea what anxiety was. I didn't know what your brain or your mind could do. I didn't know any of these things. And so for me, I was just like, oh, I'm overweight, I'm obese. Let me try to like lose weight. And so for me, that was like the first step that like I possibly ever took when it comes to like self-improvement or like my mindset of like, I just started to realize that. And I was like, how do I lose weight? So that for me was like the first step that eventually began like, all these domino steps to me realizing all these other things that I talk about now, if that makes sense.
It does. That's incredible. What an amazing story, and talk about being able to gain the perspective that you needed at the right time, right? And being able to create some distance between those thoughts that were almost on an automatic loop, and being able to break that, right? And being able to think, being able to at least activate the logical part of your brain. That's just incredible.
Yeah. And can I say one more thing too? I think this
Please.
is important. Another thing that I realized too, was that like this need of like my brain of like to try to end it, to try to like kill myself. What I realized was that, that is a need that is essential, but it was pointed at the wrong thing. So like for me, what I realized was, instead of me trying to kill myself, what my mind was actually trying to do, it was trying to kill like the first version of myself that like I had unconsciously been created. And so like I've told people all the time like that who are suicidal. And like when I say that, all of a sudden, like it makes sense in their head and things kind of click in some of the times. And it's like this need of like, you're trying to live your life, you're trying to be yourself, but you have like all of this old, memories, you have all like this past wiring in your brain that doesn't serve you anymore. And instead of like trying to kill yourself, it's this need of trying to kill like this first version of yourself. And I know for me, like I come from way back in the day, I come from like a technology software engineering perspective. And so I found that my brain works like that. And so for me, it was like, oh, if you have software like version 1.0, that's what gets the ball rolling. But then, the software version 2.0, like it's totally different, but it's an update from that. And so it's sort of like you want to kill that old version, the parts of you that aren't really you, and then use that energy towards creating the real you that's like desperately trying to escape, that's trying to go for freedom, that it's just going about it the wrong way. And a lot of the times it has to do with like, nobody teaches us these things, and so a lot of the times it's just a lack of education combined with like the very wrong circumstances, and it's very interesting, so that's another thing that's huge.
Yeah, no, that truly is. Thank you for adding on to that. It really reminds me of any time we go through a transformative process, whether it's changing the stories that we tell ourselves, trying to replace the biases that we have from growing up, that we've acquired from our parents, our grandparents, et cetera, and really looking at shifting our mindset that empowers us to be able to do the things that we really want to do. That's a whole process that we go through where we have to be intentional about that and realize that if we don't do that ourselves, if we're not being intentional about that, that there's the software, as you put it, that's automatically running that may not be aligned with who we are today and who we're looking to become. So wow, that's incredible. So tell us, what is the difference between being shy, being introverted, and social anxiety? I'm trying to wrap my head around that myself, because I would view myself more, if I were looking at a spectrum of introversion to extroversion, I lean, depending on the circumstance, I lean sometimes in the middle, but usually more toward the left, toward introversion. But I'd love to hear from you, an expert in this area.
Yeah. So, I'd probably say the same for me. I'm probably more in the middle, and honestly, it depends. Sometimes I'm more extroverted, sometimes I'm more introverted. But one of the things that to me was very strange is that if you look at the psychology definition of like what it means to be an introvert, basically all that it means is that like your brain has a natural tendency to focus more on like your internal world and to be more introspective and to rather pay more attention to the external environment, like other people and how they look. Your brain is just more naturally wired to focus more internal. That's all what an introvert means. And so a lot of the times, like being an introvert, extrovert, it actually has almost nothing to do with social anxiety. But a lot of the times, if you're an introvert and you're more in your head, a lot of times it could be overwhelming. And so you have to like learn different skills to like cope, psychologically speaking. But so when it comes to being shy, so being shy is like a totally natural, normal, like human emotion. And like, for example, I have a niece of mine. She's like about to turn 2 next week. And like, sometimes I observe it with her. And like, for example, if someone new comes in, she'll like kind of have like 2 minutes where she's kind of like standoffish. She's kind of like observant. She's kind of like watching. She may not be that expressive, but then usually after like 5 minutes, she kind of like gets the deal of like, oh, this is not a dangerous person. This person's not going to hurt me. I can just, run around and do whatever I was doing before, and so I think shyness is like sort of a mechanism that is like kind of natural for us to just deal with like, oh, are people going to judge us or like what's going to happen here? The issue is that when you are not just like shy all the time, but when you enter into a social situation, all of a sudden your brain, when it comes to social anxiety, all of a sudden your brain enters into fight or flight, which is basically a different, like literally a shift in your nervous system. So it's like, imagine your car is parked versus your car is in D for drive. It's two different modes. So people with social anxiety, the second they step into a social situation, all of a sudden their brain and their nervous system is like running this entire algorithm. That's the way that I put it, of like, how are other people viewing me? What can I do to make people judge me the least? And so a lot of the times, like people with social anxiety, they're not even really shy. They just like pretend to be shy as a defense mechanism to not talk to people and to not be themselves. And so the same way that like, fight or flight, like you're going to fight someone or you're going to run away. It's the same option of like, instead of running away, you just like pretend to be someone you're not, and you just don't talk. And so that's a lot of the times what happens, because a lot of the times people with social anxiety, by the time they're 18, 19, 20, they're young adults, a lot of them sort of like grow out of shyness, but they still have social anxiety. And like to sort of try to make it more clear, like shyness is a totally normal, natural human emotion. But the issue is that when it happens again and again and again and again at a much more severe level, to where it's just like thoughts in your mind, like, oh, let me pause for a second, to like your brain now running these operations without you even thinking about it anymore. And so it just becomes like this very self-destructive, like the way I think about it, it's like an AI. It's like an algorithm. So like whether you think about other people or whether you are physically in an environment where it's social, this algorithm will start, and it'll either get you to not be yourself, to be shy, to run away, like avoid the situation completely or leave. Most often it's like, oh, drink alcohol. Like I know Harvard did a meta-analysis study, and they showed that social anxiety is one of the most common like mental health issues in America. And it's actually the most correlated with substance abuse, social isolation, and suicide. Wow. And then what happens is, and this is probably the worst part about social anxiety, is that when you're going through this, you have no idea what's happening. Like you're literally stripped of your free will. And what happens is after the social event, after you feel like you've been judged, after school, after work, after whatever, what then happens is then your mind is like, yo, what did we just do? So then now your mind is now recounting. And basically what's happening is your mind is associating like a brain health, a mental health issue with your personality and with who you are, which is not who you are. And so what happens is you go through this experience, and then you're driving home or you're on the bus, and then now your mind is telling you like, man, I guess we really do suck. Man, I guess we really are going to end up lonely. Man, I guess we're going to be stuck like this forever. Man, I guess nobody really wants to talk to us. And so then it becomes like both the mind and the brain and your nervous system. And then what also happens as well, unfortunately, is like they've done different studies about this, like from like Boston's Children's Hospital. And what they found is that kids and people in general who face some sort of an anxiety issue, they also often have some sort of a physical health issue too, whether that's something with their stomach, usually something like with their intestines or stomach problems, or they have asthma, or their immune system becomes dysfunctional and it attacks itself. Then you have autoimmune issues, which then leads to allergies and leads to all these different things. And so it's really like this like whole body, I call it a virus that like literally destroys people like cell by cell within their brain, within their mind, within their relationships, within their family. Like it's really terrible. And it's like one of those things where I think back on now and I'm like, oh my God, thank God I was able to come out of that. And I honestly, like, part of why I do what I do is because I honestly feel like I have a responsibility to like be one of the lucky ones that was able to like literally almost kill themselves and go through these problems, but then able to get out of it and then be able to like, you know, learn communication skills and learn all this stuff and then be able to speak about it and help people. So it's crazy. It's crazy. It's really brutal. It's toxic. It's debilitating. And like, that's why it leads to suicide, because it's very unsustainable. It's terrible.
I'm listening to you and absorbing your words, and my heart is beating rapidly just listening to you as my mind is trying to process all of this and trying to visualize and try to feel what that feeling must be like, but the fact that you have been able to break that pattern and can help others do the same, I think is just truly remarkable. And we're going to dig into that here in a moment. And I'd really love, before we talk about the tools that can be used, what I would love for you to tell us what words you would use to describe yourself today.
Like in terms of like just in general, or in terms of like, do I consider myself shy or
Nope, just whatever comes to your heart at this moment. What words describe Mark Metry?
Yeah, honestly, the way that I think about it is like I honestly think that I'm like a spiritual warrior. and the reason why I say that is because even though like I had this problem throughout my entire life and I was never able to be myself, I always feel like there was a part of me like deep down that like never forgot who I truly am. And I don't know why that is. Like I would definitely consider myself like a religious person. Like my parents and I, we come from like the minority in Egypt in the Middle East that's like Christian. We're like Coptic Christian that like dates back to like one of the oldest forms of like Christianity back like when Jesus. So I definitely believe in all of that. So for me, like the way that I think about it is, and especially after like I almost committed suicide, one of the biggest things was that I realized that whatever you want to call it, whether it's like spirituality or whatever word you want to use, like a sense that there is something much, much deeper than just like the everyday reality that when you open your eyes and your brain just feeds you. And I always feel like I had access to that, but my mind, my brain, my circumstances, my environment kind of got in the way of that. And so there's many different words that I could use. Maybe I could describe myself as like a teacher. But I think spiritual warrior is what best, resonates with me.
I like that. And that, I always love to hear the words that come first. And I think that's a great one. So let's jump into some of the tools and strategies that our listeners can begin to implement to help them out in situations. And, one of the first ones that comes to mind for me when we talk about situations that we run into, especially in the business world, is networking events, when we go to seminars, when we go to different business meetings, things like that. Our listeners are entrepreneurs, they're business owners, they're in corporations, etc. And I know that there are plenty of them that are listening right now that have challenges with that have challenges meeting people, that have challenges going to, whether it's an event with 15 people or 500 or more people, figuring out how I can show up to an event like that and be able to accomplish what it is I'm trying to do. So let's talk about that for a moment and try to put yourself in a position of someone in that scenario. What can they do?
Yeah. So I think first off, so when it comes to people who have social anxiety, one of the biggest reasons why people, for the most part, are never able to escape the cycle of social anxiety, like throughout their entire lives, is because they think that they need to deal with social anxiety when they are just at networking events or when they're social. And like what I wish I could tell someone is that, like, if you're going to work on your social anxiety when you're in the middle of your social anxiety being triggered, you are almost always going to lose. Like you're almost always going to lose. And like the way that I think about it is like, you have to realize that the way that I kind of visualize this is I visualize it as like, imagine there's like one version of myself and that person is kind of sitting in like the passenger seat of a car. But then there's like almost like this, like, let's say like this dark, like shadow distorted version of myself. And I would say that represents social anxiety. And so if you're like the average person who faces this social anxiety monster, if anything, has been working a lot harder than you, because like this social anxiety algorithm has been firing every single day, mostly of your life. And so if you're in that situation, then, and that, anxiety is being triggered, then it's almost always going to overpower you, And so for me, like one of the biggest things that I've learned is that if you want to deal with your social anxiety at events or in social, almost every time, like the work starts by yourself when you're not social. And I can talk about that. But really one of the biggest things is that, so basically they found that like one of the biggest nerves in your body when it comes to anxiety, when it comes to your brain, is something called the vagus nerve. And basically what they've said is that when your nervous system enters fight or flight, when your anxiety is triggered, you feel like you can't really control yourself. What happens is that vagus nerve is sending so much data. And basically what they found is that this vagus nerve, it connects from your brain to this thing in your body called the gut microbiome. And this gut microbiome, it's basically like next to your stomach, it's next to your intestines. That's why people say like, oh, you have butterflies in your stomach, or like, oh, just trust your gut. And actually, it's like this ecosystem of trillions of bacteria, trillions and trillions of bacteria, fungi, all kinds of things. And I mean, like, for example, like just as a side note, like, last year, 2020, 21, like we all saw how like literally like a single virus could like completely change the world. And so we have like this whole ecosystem in our body, and this gut microbiome is actually directly connected to your brain through this vagus nerve. And the best way I would describe it is it's almost like an elastic band. And so what happens is like, you're just chilling, you're at home, you're playing video games or you're doing whatever. And like this elastic band is like just sitting there. And then you start to think like, oh, what am I going to say to this person tomorrow? And like the social anxiety algorithm starts, whether that's your thoughts, whether that's your feelings, whether that's the sensations. And this elastic band just gets like stretched more and more and more and more. And if you've ever done this, like the elastic band starts to shake. And when it shakes even more and the tighter it is, that's like those are the times where you have the least control over your mind. And so they have found like there are specific things that you can do to like relax this vagus nerve. One of the biggest ones is by like taking care of your gut microbiome. And like, just as a side note, like humans, we can't digest plant fiber, for example. And so what actually happens is when you eat plant fiber, your gut microbiome is actually what eats it. And then it sends the output, it sends like the chemicals, the bacteria to your stomach for your body to digest, to run. And so one of the biggest things is that your gut microbiome actually has a huge impact on how your brain is generating neurotransmitters. And so neurotransmitters are huge. They're talked a lot about in the mental health world. And specifically when it comes to social anxiety and anxiety in general, there is this neurotransmitter called serotonin. I'm sure you've heard of it. And it does a lot of different things in our body, from controlling our mood to our digestion. It's actually the area where your brain specializes in where it thinks you are in society's hierarchy. Like if you're better than other people, if you're worse than other people, it could be right, it could be wrong, it's a guess. And then basically based on that, it will produce other neurotransmitters that send them the same messages to your body. And so, for example, Harvard calls this field nutritional psychiatry. And so what they found is that if you can help your gut microbiome, which in a lot of people is heavily inflamed, and they've actually done studies and they've shown that people who are suicidal or people who have other health issues, their gut is actually completely unstable and it's in a mode called dysbiosis. And like, that's part of like what's happening, part of like the inflammation, part of why your brain is like literally breaking. Wow. Your brain is sending the wrong chemicals to each other. And like, that's again, like, that's why there's many different health issues that are often complicated with this. And so one of the easiest ways to do this is just like, by starting to eat healthy, trying to avoid processed food, sugar, alcohol, like industrialized vegetable oils, chemicals, things like that at a most basic level. And then there's also other things that you can do. For example, there's this thing called vagus nerve stretches. And basically what it is, it's sort of like an adapted version of yoga. And basically what it is you put your body in certain positions where this vagus nerve is being triggered. And almost like what happens is sort of like an elastic band. Going back to that analogy, if it's really tight, when you stretch it out and you could sort of relax it, and that'll just go a little bit smaller, get a little bit looser, get a little bit looser, get a little bit looser. And so there's all kinds of things that I can say, but like those two are definitely huge. And you know, if you talk to anyone who has social anxiety, what you're going to realize is that when they're in these networking events or when they're in these social situations, not only is their mind like racing or is their mind blank, but also their body feels very, very tense. And so that's part of like this whole sort of algorithm that's running all throughout your body. And so for me, what I found to work the best is kind of approaching it through this holistic kind of method of like looking at your diet, looking at your gut microbiome, looking at your nerves, because a lot of the times, like that's what's going to give you the best, longest lasting, like long-term results. You know, it's one thing to tell someone like advice, or it's to tell one person to like, oh, be confident or whatever, and they feel better for like 30 seconds. But then if you can sort of do this and you can work with your brain and your nervous system, this will give you like the best long-term kind of results that'll like the best bang for your buck, so to speak.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's incredibly powerful. And, you know, obviously we're also going to be linking to your website and linking to where we can purchase your book, because I know you go into a lot more detail on different areas of what we're touching on right now, but that's incredible information.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I want to go back to alcohol for a moment. So
yes,
when someone's in a social setting, and you know, we've always heard that alcohol lowers the inhibitions, and it seems like it's a kind of a go-to tool, if you will, to help us deal with anxiety and stress in situations where we're around a lot of people. Is that something that that people can use, or is it not a good idea?
It's a good question. So I don't think there's anything wrong with like drinking alcohol to celebrate. You know, like if you have your wedding or if you have your birthday, or again, and people should do whatever they want. I don't think there's a problem with celebrating. However, most people, at least around the world, I was going to say in America, but probably around the world, most people don't use alcohol to celebrate. They use alcohol to medicate. And I think a lot of the times when you're in that situation, it could be very, very dangerous. And thankfully for me, like I thank God every day that I never discovered alcohol when I was younger. I only discovered it when I was 18, because I think that if I did, I don't think I'd be here today. And it's one of those things where it's like a slippery slope, because it's so societally like acceptable. You know what I mean? And like I'll go out to dinner with my girlfriend or whoever, and like I try not to drink in social situations, because I don't want to give my brain like the out of like, oh, just drink this and you can be yourself easier. I would rather like force myself to do that. And so, yeah, what I would say is that with social anxiety, I definitely don't recommend it. That's why, like, you know, in Harvard's meta-analysis study, they showed that like alcoholism is the most common in social anxiety because of like that exact reason. So I think, yeah, I mean, I think like drinking a glass of wine isn't a big deal. But I think there is a more long-term issue. So if you're drinking like every day, or you're drinking like every weekend, or like you have to drink to be social, then it's like one of those things where like, hey, you have to be careful about that, because again, alcohol is fine to celebrate, but it's a very, very bad medicine. Like it's not going to heal you. If anything, it's just going to make things worse. And they've even done studies that show like, you know, when alcohol like shuts down this part of your brain that factors in social judgment, what's also happening too is that there's all these different like neurotransmitters, from dopamine, which is like what gets you to do things, to oxytocin, which helps you feel like connected and bonded to other people, to serotonin. What happens is that the next day when you wake up, like alcohol doesn't have these neurotransmitters in it. What's happening is by the process of your brain trying to remove alcohol from your system, it actually floods you with neurotransmitters to help you feel good so that it's not painful. And so that's what being drunk it actually is. And so what happens is the next day, there's a natural regression of like, hey, if your brain had to produce extra neurotransmitters last night, the next day, the morning, the night of, the following day, the week of, your brain is going to have like that a tiny bit of inability to produce those same neurotransmitters. So it can be like a chemical sort of accelerant towards already someone having like a bad habit. What I recommend to people is there's alternatives that you can do. So in terms of like literally drinking alternatives, one of them, for example, is like they've shown that like CBD, like the non-psychoactive part of like cannabis, they've shown that that greatly decreases anxiety and there doesn't seem to be as many risks or side effects. So that's one of them. Another one is you can drink this thing called a raw cacao drink. It's been used in ancient cultures. All it is just the active component of like what's in chocolate, cacao. Okay. And basically when you drink that, it has this chemical called theobromine, which is a precursor to oxytocin. And so they would use this drink back then, like, you know, hundreds of years ago, to like feel more connected with other people and to sort of open your heart more. And so if you can drink this drink, it'll help you be social. Obviously, it's not as powerful as alcohol. None of these things are as powerful as alcohol. Then there's another thing called like a GABA adaptogenic drink. So for example, so this is grape soda. So there's this company, it's called Olipop. I actually just worked, FYI, I actually just worked out a deal for them to sponsor my podcast, but it hasn't happened yet. But anyway, excellent. Basically this drink, basically instead of just like made out of sugar and chemicals, which is what soda is made out of, it has zero sugar, it has zero chemicals. And actually what it has is it literally has like 8-9 different supplements and like different vegetables that have literally been used for thousands of years for like herbal medicines. And then, so like literally you drink this and they sell this at like Whole Foods. They sell this in some other grocery stores. It's not going to physically make you feel different, but what'll happen is it'll make your gut microbiome calm down, which then starts to decrease that whole vagus nerve fight or flight system. And so if you drink this, it will calm your gut microbiome down, which in turn will calm your nerves down, which in turn will calm your brain down. So there's like different recommendations that people can check out that they can sort of like drink, sort of similar to alcohol. I think there's other things too. Like I think like going for a run, I think is huge because like, you know, your whole endorphin system is also what like what processes, like if you ever go to the hospital for like, and they give you morphine, like a painkiller, that lowers your perception of pain. And so when you go for a run, you can trigger that same response, obviously a little bit lower. So like, I know for me, like any of the days where I'm going to go to like an event and like talk, like do some public speaking, I'm always going to go for a run before because I want to make sure that like my body, you know, everything is going well. And then another thing too is like doing different breathing exercises. So there's this app, I'm not affiliated with them. I wish they would sponsor me. It's called Breathwork, and it's just Breathwork without the O, and it's for free. And basically like you go on this app and it basically asks you, do you want to calm down? Do you want to gain more energy? Do you want to recharge? Do you want to go to sleep? And so basically you click on these and it's all these breathing exercises that range from 1 minute to 3 minutes to 5 minutes. And you can do them. And like, that's one of the fastest things that I know that will literally help calm down your anxiety, because a lot of the times, like a lot of these things that I talk about, generally speaking, this is more of like long-term, you know, it's not like if you do these things, all of a sudden you're going to change. But some of these things that I mentioned of like running, drinking the different drinks, doing the breathing exercises, those things are more on the instantaneous spectrum that will give you something close to like alcohol.
Perfect. These are some great tools. Thank you for sharing that. Do you, in addition to the breath work, do you meditate?
Oh, every day. Yeah.
What does your meditation practice look like?
Yeah. So, you know, meditation was actually one of the biggest things that completely changed my life. And it's actually, aside from like the gut microbiome, vagus nerve stuff that I mentioned, I would say it's also up there in terms of like the top 5 things that has been proven to work with people with social anxiety, specifically like mindfulness meditation. when I first started, I just used like Headspace. And then I took a course called Ziva meditation, Ziva. And that course totally changed my life. And they teach a combination of like mindfulness and transcendental meditation. And so every day I do that. And it's like this whole thing. And then I actually, like I like created this online course, and I actually created my own social anxiety meditation. And like I literally walk someone through like the guided, then how do you breathe and like shift your nervous system to like make you feel something different. And then it goes into like mindfulness, and then it goes into like visualization to like help expose you to your fears, like in your brain. So it's very, very interesting. But yeah, I meditate. I highly recommend it. I think for some people, mindfulness meditation is very effective, but really there's so many different kinds of meditation, but I think meditation is huge, 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 massive.
Well, it certainly has had a huge benefit on you and on your life. So is that the meditation practice that you created, is that part of your 45-day program that's available online?
Yes.
It is. Okay. Terrific.
Yes. Yeah.
Terrific.
It comes with it. Yeah.
Yeah. So since we're talking about that, share a bit about that program, when you created it and how we can access it.
Yeah. So basically for me, my book, Screw Being Shy, it came out last year in March, the day that COVID shut down everything. And so it's kind of a disaster when it comes to marketing, but I was actually working on my program like before then. And so the book is sort of like the program, but in written form, it's like more simple. It's kind of my story. And basically like this program that I created, I've been working on it for like the last like year and a half now. And basically what it is like, if I could teach someone like day by day, step by step, what they need to know, how they should learn it, how they can go about it, this is the program. So basically it's like a 9-week program. It's 45 days, like you said. And it just takes people through like, here's all the different layers of social anxiety. Here's like literally how to address them day by day incrementally, obviously, because a lot of these things, it's like a system, a lot of these things, like for it to work, you have to address it layer by layer by layer. It's not just about doing one thing or doing one thing for a week. It's like really addressing it layer by layer, day by day, week by week. And so my program is just what I created to like give to someone who is facing social anxiety, whether it's like very serious and like, let's say they're suicidal, or they're just trying to improve like their nervous system confidence, speaking ability. And so, yeah, literally every single week it takes you through like, here's what you need to know. Here's how to like begin to like rest your mind. Here's how to begin to like rewire your mind. Here's how to begin to like change your diet and your gut microbiome and all these different things. And it's really just my attempt at like trying to give someone like the easiest possible way to like go through like the hell that I went through and a lot of people went through as well. And it also costs like $50. So I also try my best to like, not make it cost a lot of money, because I want as many people as possible to, take it while also not making it free, because people who, take free things, sometimes they don't value them, so it's one of those things. But yeah, so far, like, I think like over 500 people have signed up for it. I launched it over a month ago. And I mean, it's crazy, man. I actually just got off the phone before this with a mom who got this program for like her 14-year-old son. And like, she literally told me the craziest thing. She literally told me, she said, I feel like I have my son back. And like, when I hear something like that, very overwhelming. And so, yeah, it's very crazy. So that's so my way to sell you the program. But
no, I love that. And we can access that program through your website.
Yeah. So the best place is, my website, just my first and last name.com, markmetry.com/program. But also what I would say is, if anyone wants to reach out to me, if anyone wants to learn more about anything, if you go to my website, there will be an email box. And if you put your email in there, you will be subscribed to my email newsletters, where every week I send out like 2 or 3 like educational articles. And then if you have a question, you can respond back to an email that I send.
Okay.
And it'll automatically go to me, and I respond back to every single one of those.
Perfect.
So FYI.
Very good. So there's a high level of engagement there too. And before I jump into the last question here, I also want you to share about your podcast. And when I first came across you and your content, your podcast was under another name. You rebranded it. And so just tell us very briefly about your podcast, because you talk all about this topic and you're incredibly knowledgeable and just giving of such great information. So take a moment and share with us about that podcast and how has that changed your world?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I was going to say, like, if people don't want to take my program, you could just listen to my podcast. I create 3 episodes every week, literally just like pure actionable, tells you what to do. You could do that too. But so I hosted this podcast for years called Humans 2.0. And it started off about self-improvement, self-development. Then I started to go into like mental health, brain health, this kind of area. And then, honestly, like kind of the events of last year and everything, it honestly kind of like demotivated me. And I was like, wait, what am I even doing here? And I felt like I was just sort of adding to the noise. And so I was like, I need to really get in touch with my purpose and figure out like what exactly and like the kinds of people that I'm serving in the world. So then that's like what got me to shift ultimately to like reshifting it to the Social Anxiety Society. And yeah, I mean, it's been awesome. I mean, definitely started off slow, but like this month, I think my podcast is about to get 1.2 million downloads in like the month, which is crazy. And it actually turns out, if you search for social anxiety on Spotify, my podcast will come up as like the #1 results. So like Spotify boosted my thing. So that's awesome, because that's so cool, because I remember in 2015, like at the end when I was in my dark time in 2016, this is before I knew what mindset was, what mental health was. I didn't even know there were books written about this stuff. I remember the first thing I did was go to Spotify and like search for mindset or like search for like one of these things and then just like listen to whatever was in there. And so it's kind of like a full circle of moment of like, I hope that young version of me, like 2015, 2016, who has no idea what's going on, but it's like, oh, social anxiety, can like search for it on Spotify and like find my podcast randomly and like listen to it. So I think that's what's happening, which is really cool.
Man, what a beautiful thing, and a great way to give back and connect with people who need to hear that your message, right? And it always seems that the message comes at the right time through the right voice. So I think it's amazing. And another thing, Mark, and clearly you're impacting lives, but it's so interesting how you may never even hear from someone whose life you impacted through your message, through your words, through your writings, right? But it happens. And then you'll run across others who will just send you a quick note out of the blue and tell you how much they appreciate you and what you mean to them and how this saved them or helped them be able to show up more empowered and overcome or at least manage through social anxiety. So keep doing it. I think it's amazing. So we're clearly going to, thank you. So we're going to link to everything in the show notes. And so really here's my final question to you. What are you adding or eliminating from your life to live more fulfilled and with greater purpose?
That's a great question. So I think this is kind of a silly example, but like this morning I got a massage. I got like a full body massage. And last year I made myself a goal of like, I'm going to get a massage every other week. And I literally never got a massage. I got like 2 massages throughout the entire year. And like, that sounds simple, but I think one of the things for me is that instead of give myself the option, I'm just going to set it in my calendar and just do it. And so it's like one of those things where it's like the same way where I don't really give myself the option to like eat healthy or not eat healthy, or to meditate or to not meditate, or to exercise or to not exercise, which has like literally helped my life so much. It's just about doing that to more things. So I think my next thing is getting massages, because I think that's also part of like the whole yoga, stretching. It relieves part of your body's kind of like stress and tension. So, and I feel 1,000 times better than how I felt this morning. So it's one of those things where I'm going to do like every week. I'm going to do it every other Tuesday.
Love that. I think I might have to add that to my list as well. Thank you for the suggestion there. And thank you for sharing. And thank you for spending time with us on Business Minds Coffee Chat. I'm truly grateful for you. Thank you for sharing of your knowledge and your experience and your wisdom, and your story is such an inspiration. So thank you very much. I appreciate you.
Of course, man. This was literally so much fun. You're an amazing host, Jay, and I appreciate everyone for listening to this. And yeah, thank you for creating this platform and having me on. And I hope you'll have me on as a guest, like again, a year from now. So
absolutely count on it. And for all of you, thank you so very much for watching and for listening. And would you do us a favor? Please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review. I know, Mark, I know I would love to hear your comments. What were some of the key takeaways? And we'll make sure that we share that with Mark. And to learn about Jay Shear Business Consulting and how we can help your business achieve better results, all you have to do is visit jayshearbusinessconsulting.com. And until next time, stay healthy, keep learning and growing, and make sure that you order a copy of Screw Being Shy. And we will see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care.
Jay Shear.
Jay Shear.
Jay Shear. Jay Shear.
Business Consultant.
Jay Shear.
Jay Shear Business Consulting.